also had the first thing on the list was neighbors helping neighbors. We talked a bit about resiliency in terms of the fire and then the storm. So the fire is kind of how to rebuild the community after the fire, and some different thoughts on that. Part of the conversation on storm was kind of the neighbors helping neighbors, checking in on neighbors and just seeing what people can do to support each other in those times of need. Some of the concerns that were addressed were just related to like funding, federal and state grants, and how some projects could be funded being a potential issue. Some of the things that the utility could do to support the community that were discussed among the table were just like building resiliency of the distribution system, but then also programs for customers related to generation, like generators at the sites. There's some discussion about finding specific locations that people could go for, like in times where it's hot, where there's air conditioning, or like a warming center, those types of services that maybe a communal space that people can come to just to like charge their phone or do certain things to just get a break if their power's out for an extended period. Do you have anything else on the first one?
Sure. For resiliency, we also talked about emergency preparedness, that, you know, I know at UWeb we continue to work on emergency preparedness. It's critically important, and we're constantly working on our systems. But just the recognition that in that ice storm, there were folks who, you know, were out of power for several weeks, and more and more we can do to help that, prevent that from happening, the better it's going to be, because it really does have big impacts. The other thing is, in terms of resiliency, is just the acknowledgement that, you know, after the Holiday Farm fire, there's a real fear and anxiety that, you know, could this happen again? You know, what am I going to lose this time? You know, people are still really rebuilding, and I think that's really important to acknowledge and to understand that real fear that people feel when we have situations and conditions that are similar to that. And I think that what our role could be in that is communicating out resources and just continuing to work on our communication for resources, and thinking about how we can bridge any gaps in the community, you know, that align with our strengths and our abilities. Another thing is, in terms of resiliency that we talked about, was an awareness of the vulnerable population. You know, folks who, you know, they might lose a refrigerator full of food. That's a lot more impactful for some folks than others, and that's really important to recognize and to do what we can in order to help those folks. So I thought that was a really important conversation. Was it for resiliency?
A couple notes on the impact of Lieberg was just early communication. I think if there's a decision that's going to particularly affect someone's water supply, just the earlier and the more time people have to plan, the better. One other note on the transportation issue, the one that I wrote down was no more covered bridges on the river. Got one vote, please.
Let's see, the other conversation we talked about was a lot about communication. You know, I know that we work really hard to communicate when we anticipate changes, or when our operations might be impacted, or if our chosen operations how they will impact the residents, and just continuing to make sure that we're using the right avenues to get that communication out to people, and continuing to check in with residents and make sure that that's, you know, accessible and received by folks. And then the last thing about communication that I would like to add, just a reminder to folks, that we do have 3 email addresses within Generation that you can always ask any kind of question. I know that it's monitored on a daily basis by Jeremy Smoji, who's in the room here, and then also my staff. And those are lieberginfo@uweb.org, waltervilleinfo@uweb.org, and then damsafetyinfo@uweb.org, which is newer. And that went out with the dam safety brochure that was out back in November, and my staff people look at that inbox every single day. So if you have general questions about any of those content, anything that we talked about tonight, that's a place that you can reach out to.
Great, thank you both. Could you bring it over here to